Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. I am your host, Angie Grandt. And for today's episode, I want to share a story about a friend. I was hanging out with a friend recently, and she was talking about her kids and struggles, and she made a comment that I have heard and have felt and have said all too much. She said, if my kids would just behave, I wouldn't have to lose my, you know what. She was implying that if the kids would just start listening, if the kids would just just do as they're told, if the kids would stop yelling and screaming and doing all of the things that the kids are doing, that she wouldn't have to yell. Well, she wasn't implying that. She said that, right? And I've been there too. I remember thinking, if my son would just stop getting in so much trouble, I wouldn't be so frustrated with him all the time. If he would just show me a little bit of reciprocal love, it would be easier to love him. I remember thinking that if my son could just heal his trauma, our relationship could be so much easier. We all do this to some extent, some of us much more than others, but we all do this. We all do this thing where we take our responsibility for how we're thinking and feeling, and we put it on our kids. We expect our kids to make choices about behaviors that we as adults are struggling to make ourselves. So I want to break this down, this idea of if the kids would just behave, I would be a better parent. I want to break this down into a handful of things that I look at behaviors through to perhaps help you shift the way that you're thinking about your kids and interacting with your kids. Because here's what I know. We can't possibly expect our kids to do better than we do. We can't possibly expect these little humans who are learning everything about life from us. We can't expect them to not yell at us when we're yelling at them. We can't expect them to be totally honest when maybe we've been deceptive to them and they see it. We can't expect our kids to show a higher level of maturity than we are, which can be hard to hear sometimes, but it's the truth. So when I first think about this concept of if the kids would just behave, the first thing that popped up for me was responsibility. You are 100% responsible for all of your results in life. You're responsible for how you think and feel about everything that is happening in your life. When I share this with people in workshops or with my clients, I usually get some pushback, right? How could I possibly be responsible for being attacked in a parking lot or being molested by a parent or for being in a car accident that wasn't my fault? How could I possibly be responsible for that? Well, that is true. Life will continue to have circumstances that are outside of our control. I know that when I adopted my son, I thought I had everything kind of figured out. I thought I had all things behavior figured out. I knew exactly what I was doing being his parent, or so I thought. But when his behaviors were out of the scope of what I had experience with or what I knew how to handle, when things got really tricky and scary in my home, I passed all of my responsibility back to my son. Like somehow it was his job to figure out how to behave better so I could be a better parent. So I'm not responsible for how my son behaved, but I am 100% responsible for how I thought and felt about what he was doing. I didn't have to be frustrated. I didn't have to feel like a victim. I didn't have to be mad at him. I didn't have to resent and regret him being in my family, but I did. I handed over all of my responsibility for how I was behaving. I handed it all over to a kid with a significant traumatic history. And I thought that was okay because I couldn't see it any other way. So let that be our step one. When we're frustrated with our kids, take a step back and take full responsibility for your thoughts and feelings. You absolutely have the right to be mad at your kids and to be frustrated, but have that feeling or that thought for a moment and then remind yourself what you're responsible for. You get to decide to shift the way you're thinking and feeling about your kids. You can hold on to that grudge and being frustrated and annoyed. You can choose to do that. I give you total reign to do that. But why in the heck would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to shift your feelings so that you could show up different for your kids? So that's step one, is taking full responsibility. The second thing that I want to consider when we're thinking about our kids misbehaving is our kids' basic needs. And of course, I mean, food and shelter, those are super important basic needs, and I'm not dismissing those, but we as humans have another list of basic needs that must be met in order for us to function well. We have to feel empowered as humans. We have to feel like we have control over what's happening in our life. We have to feel valued. We have to feel loved and lovable. We have to have the freedom to experiment and explore. So when we look at situations with our kids again, and our kids are misbehaving, I want you to take a pause and ask yourself. You're going to have a lot of questions to ask yourself after this, but I want you to take a pause and ask yourself, does my child feel really empowered right now? Do they feel like they have control over things that are happening in their life? Or do they feel like all of the control is on you? Does my child feel like they're valuable? Can I honestly say that my child feels totally lovable right now? And does my child feel like they have the freedom to experiment and explore? I can tell you with all honesty that had I had these questions to ask myself 10 years ago, 15 years ago with my son, the answer would have been no, that he probably didn't feel like he had power over what was happening in his life. I mean, I could say that with almost full certainty that he felt a huge sense of disempowerment just because of his adoption. He didn't get to choose. He didn't get to choose to leave his family. That was chosen for him. I also feel confident that he didn't feel very valued. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to look past the behaviors that were so much in my face and help him feel valuable. I do know that I made sure that there were people in his life that saw his value and could share that with him and look past the behaviors. That is something that was really important in the network that I had in parenting, was making sure when I couldn't, that there was somebody there who could. I also know that he questioned his lovability, because he would say those words not quite exactly like that, but things like, you don't really love me. You don't want me in the family. I don't belong here. And that last one about experimenting and exploring, the more challenging behaviors got in our home, the less I allowed him to experiment and explore, because I was concerned for safety. I know that when I look back at the experience that my son had, those 4 basic needs weren't being met. I didn't know how to do that and manage behaviors. But here's the trick. If I had been able to find a place, and this is what I'm sharing with you, but to find a place where you can allow those basic needs, encourage those basic needs, and still make sure your kids are safe, that's where our kids need us to be for them. All right, so then the next one is mistaken motivations. When our kids are misbehaving, when we look at them through the lens of mistaken motivations, this means that they have unmet energy needs. And it's our job to take a step back, look at how we're feeling when our kids are misbehaving, and take note of which mistaken motivation are they displaying. So I'm not going to go through them line by line. We have another episode about that, but in general, if we feel like we want to overpower our kids, or we feel like we need to save it and swoop our kids, or we feel like we're giving so much attention to our kids, or we feel like we want to teach them a lesson. One of those four mistaken motivations is in play, and it's our job as parents to not only assess which mistaken motivation is at play, but then to intervene in a way that we're meeting those unmet energy needs. To punish our child because they have an unmet energy need of empowerment, or to yell at our child because they're displaying the mistaken motivation of attention isn't going to fix the problem. In fact, it'll probably make it worse. So that's step 3. First is responsibility. Second is basic needs. The third is mistaken motivations. The fourth thing that I now consistently look through when I am talking with parents, when I'm supporting parents, is the 9 resiliency keys. When I think about what needs to be in place for our kids to thrive, it is those 9 resiliency keys. The next thing is that, so step number 5, or lens number 5, when our kids are misbehaving and we just keep losing it, right? Is to take a pause and remember that our kids are living out their design. So are we. So when we see our kids misbehaving, instead of attacking that behavior, reacting to the behavior, what if we instead said, I wonder what it is about their design that's leading to this behavior presentation that I'm seeing? Because there's a really good chance when we're looking through mistaken motivations, looking at those basic needs, looking at the 9 resiliency keys, and looking at our kids' design, their unique energetic design, we'll see exactly what's going on with their behaviors. But it isn't just about our kids' design, it's about our design and how we are reacting or responding to their behaviors, and how our energy attracts and repels and compromises our kids' energy, and how that all works together. Because we're not doing this alone. We're all here engaging in life. Our energy is interacting with each other. You know, I said this in a recent post, but 93% of our communication is nonverbal. And we've been hearing this for decades, right? I remember learning this back in college. About 93% of our communication is nonverbal. Well, then I thought, okay, so 93% is my face and my body language? That seems like a lot. Well, no, that's not the whole story. 7% are our words. 93% is our face, our body language, and a huge chunk of that is our energy that we're putting out into our space, into our environment, into our home, into our workplace. Our energy, we're emitting an energetic signal all the time. And when we understand what ours is, when we understand what our blueprint is for how our energy works, it gives us so much control over shifting that knob from a lower frequency energy up to a higher frequency energy. We get to control that. But when we don't understand our human design, we're kind of guessing, and we're reacting in a habitual pattern on loop because we don't know any better. We don't know what we have control over. So understanding our human design and our kids' human design gives us this incredible power to shift our frequency, to show up differently for our kids, and to look at our kids so differently. When we can look at our kids and say, like, oh, it makes so much sense that they're acting that way because I see this or that in their design. For example, if you have a child who is a manifester or a manifesting generator, they have this internal drive to just go and do, and they have this aura that is designed to really protect them and a little bit shut other people out. But to a parent, that might look like a child who's being disobedient or who's all over the place and is impulsive. It might look to a parent like a child who isn't listening, who isn't paying attention, who isn't responding to you, when in fact they're doing their purpose. They're being their purpose. They're fulfilling their energy needs. And when we give them feedback about, in this example, like you're not listening to me, or you're doing what you're not supposed to be doing, or you can't do this, you can't do that, we're squashing their drive that is internally in them and telling them that it's not okay to be who they are. When we understand our kids' needs, we show up differently for them. We see them differently, and we can love them differently. The last thing I want to just not neglect as we're talking about all of this, but when we think about our kids misbehaving, oftentimes I hear parents in a desperate need to find some label, some diagnosis, some reason that their child is misbehaving. I was there too. My son had the alphabet soup of diagnoses because I was on a relentless pursuit to figure out, to understand what was wrong, because it couldn't possibly be me, right? I had all these parenting tools in my tool belt. It couldn't, the dynamic between my son and I, and my son and school staff and other people out in the community, right? All of that couldn't possibly be because of my parenting, right? I'm a great parent. But in my desperate pursuit to find the right label that would finally make sense to me, that would finally explain it all, which here's the joke. There is no diagnosis that's going to make sense of everything that you see with your child, because as you just heard me explain, your child is a unique energetic configuration who has basic needs, who's displaying mistaken motivations, who is probably struggling with some, if not all, of the 9 resiliency keys, and who's just living out their design. But there may be a diagnosis that is leading to some of the behaviors. I don't want to gloss over that. I don't want to skip over that. But I also want to caution you that perhaps what looks like a diagnosed condition, maybe what looks like anxiety or what looks like ADHD, what if instead it's your child living out their design and not fitting into the box that we as parents, that we as society have created for kids? What if what looks like a delay or a disability is really instead just a child trying to fit in to a box that isn't their size? So I want to end this episode with thinking about, as we think about this concept of, if the kids would just behave, I wouldn't have to lose my you know what. I I encourage you to take a moment to think about, what is your goal with your kids? Is your goal that they learn how to be compliant and conform to your expectations? Or is your goal that your child learns how to be compassionate and curious? And I know that it's not black or white, it's not either or, but oftentimes when we're approaching challenging behaviors with kids, our goal of parenting well-rounded humans really quickly shifts to, I'm in control, I need you to listen to me. And our kids see that. Our kids remember that. Our brain is designed to remember the bad when it's connected to emotions more than it will remember the good or the normal everydays. Those memories that our kids are building are deeply connected to emotions. So when we're yelling at our kids and we're punishing our kids and they're feeling strong emotions about that, those are the memories they're holding on to. So let's not lose sight of what our goal is for our kids. Our goal is to raise compassionate, capable, evolving humans, not compliant, conformed humans. So I hope that you found some useful nuggets, perhaps some different ways of looking at your kids as you listen to this episode. I would love I'd love any feedback or ideas that you have. Feel free to email me, reach out, and when you're ready to start shifting things in your family, I do offer a free consult, and I would love to meet with you, talk with you, go through a relationship audit where I'll show you exactly where to start making just incredible changes in your family.